Open the door! Sheriff's office!
A Florida woman is in very deep trouble after police say she pretended to be an immigration enforcement officer so she could kidnap her ex's wife from her job. We were able to gather details about the suspect's background and how it supposedly led to her in a fake ICE shirt putting a scared and confused woman into her car. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, so before we jump into this story, I want to talk to you real quick about the Law&Crime docket. Want to talk true crime news and some Law&Crime merch? This is your one-stop shop for all of the trending stories, thrilling body cams, and also an exclusive look at brand new shows and podcasts from the faces that you love. Sign up for our docket newsletter by scanning the QR code you see here or click on the link in our description and pinned in the comment right underneath this video. And at the beginning of June, we're going to pick 10 new docket subscribers and we're going to send them a Law&Crime hat. That's right. So winners are going to be announced in the newsletter. Hope you can check it out. Let's get back to the case. All right, this is certainly quite the story. On April 11th, deputies with the Bay County, Florida Sheriff's Office stopped a silver car and demanded that the driver, 52-year-old Latrance Battle, get out. Body cam footage showing her arrest was recently released. Take a look.
1033 on Main, 1033 on. Got it.
Open the door! Sheriff's office!
Roll your window down.
Open the door!
Yeah, I'm gonna put my car in.
Step out.
Step out.
Turn around, face the car.
You can't do nothing right now.
445 Bay, lift the channel 1015.
1823 hours.
Air 1 copy.
So now the question is, how do we get here, right? Well, according to investigators, just a day earlier, on April 10th, Latrance pretended to be an agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and then allegedly kidnapped a woman who it turns out is her ex's new wife from her workplace, eventually driving her to an apartment complex before the victim could escape. The affidavit that was filed with a warrant for Latrance's arrest lays out exactly what the victim claims happened in quite explicit detail. To talk more about it, to talk more about the elements of this case, I want to bring in criminal defense attorney and legal analyst Kaysia Earley. Kaysia, so good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Great to see you as well.
So as you know, I'm probably made of a ton of questions when it comes to this case, but I first just want to lay out a little bit of it and then get your take on it. So it's hard to know exactly what was going through the suspect's mind, but deputies got a rundown from the victim in this case, who we're only identifying by her first name, which is Merica. Now, the deputy who wrote up the affidavit says that when he got in touch with Merica, she was shaking and appeared to be really afraid. Merica stated as she was working a Days Inn 435 Tyndall Parkway, the defendant, later identified as Latrance Battle, walked in wearing a black zip-up jacket, black pants, black hat, white face mask, and sunglasses. Merica asked Latrance if she needed a room, and Latrance responded she was here to pick her up. At that time, Latrance unzipped her jacket, and that is when Merica noticed the word ICE across her chest printed on a black shirt. Latrance also displayed a sheriff's office card identifying herself as ICE. Merica asked if she could call her boss first to let him know what was going on, and Latrance allowed this. Now, according to Bay County deputies, Merica is in the process of obtaining U.S. residency, but because her status could be considered uncertain, she didn't know what to do. So, Kaysia, right off the bat, we have got some pretty obvious evidence that she's impersonating an officer, right? Wearing the shirt, having some sort of badge. Even before she takes Merica anywhere, presuming this is on a surveillance tape as well, that in and of itself is a crime, right?
Of course. And we know the current climate now with the immigration issues. So the alleged victim in this case had every reason to believe that she was being detained by an ICE agent. And in this case, you have the defendant who did everything to make herself look as if she was an ICE agent. Like you said, she had ICE written across her chest, she had the radio, and she had the intent. And this is what that affidavit, the probable cause affidavit, spells out. So then, although she didn't have a gun, people think that, okay, you can't kidnap anyone without a weapon, but that's not the case. She utilized the guise of being in immigration to take her from one location to another location. And in this case, the alleged victim complied because we know that her immigration status was not secured. She was in the process of finalizing her immigration status. And then that's where this case gets kind of crazy because she doesn't take her to a customs agent or to an office. She takes her to an apartment complex.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the alleged victim gets away.
What a harrowing story, right? But look, this is definitely one we wanted to bring to you. And for that, I have to thank our incredible sponsor and partner, Morgan & Morgan, because it's with their support that helps us to make these shows. Now, this is America's largest injury law firm. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash victim in Florida, a $5.6 million verdict for another car accident victim in Atlanta, and not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them a mere $5,000 in that case. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. You don't even have to leave the couch. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. Do we see cases like this often? People impersonating law enforcement officers, federal officials? Because there's one thing someone would say, if I pulled out a badge, right, they said that's not real, right? You know, people would write no. But you're targeting potentially a segment of the population, and then this is, you know, a one-off case, or maybe there's more, who might not be familiar really with what ICE agents look like, particularly if they're not from this country. And I'm just curious, generally speaking, in your practice and your experience, do you see crimes of people impersonating law enforcement or federal authorities?
Oftentimes you see crimes of impersonation for law enforcement, not of ICE agents. And you raise a good point because typically ICE agents, there's no set uniform, right? Because they're usually undercover and they don't have a uniform look. So in this case, she didn't know. And again, she complied. But there was some history between the alleged victim and the defendant in this case. And the defendant had to be doing some research to know what her immigration status was. And we now know that the defendant in this case was the ex-girlfriend of the new husband of the alleged victim. And there was she has a lengthy history, a criminal history, as well as a no contact order here in Florida. It's a restraining order. So there's so many violations in addition to the criminal charges.
Now, let me lay this out a little bit more because we do have a lot more details. So according to Merica, she went outside with Latrance to this silver sedan, apparently the same one that we saw in that body cam video from when she was arrested. And the affidavit says, Latrance got in the driver's seat and instructed Merica to get in. Merica then got in the back seat on the passenger side. I confirmed with Merica that Latrance never physically placed her in the vehicle, but she was scared and didn't want to get in more trouble or have more ICE agents show up, so she got inside the vehicle. Merica stated as they were leaving, Latrance advised she was taking her to the sheriff's office. Real quick, Kaysia, why does it matter how Merica got in the car?
Because it's the mindset of the alleged victim in this case. So in this case, Merica thought that she had to comply with the orders of this, quote, ICE agent. And so she did that. And then you have the belief that if she did not comply, she could be hurt. So she didn't know. If she truly believed that this was an ICE agent, it would be reasonable for the alleged victim to also believe that this ICE agent had a weapon, even though that weapon was never exposed. So that is the most important part. You have to get into the mens rea of what the defendant, the criminal act, the criminal intent of what the defendant was thinking during their actions.
And going back to that, you go back to the affidavit, it reads, due to her still being scared and unsure of what was going on, Merica was trying to contact her lawyer. At some point, Latrance reached in the back seat and forcibly snatched Merica's phone from her hands, depriving her of her iPhone 11. Merica also asked Latrance several times during the car ride if she could have her phone back to call her husband and lawyer, but Latrance told her no. And when they got to the sheriff's office, she could have her one phone call. Now, Kaysia, if alarm bells weren't going off before, I imagine they certainly are now, right?
Of course. And so not only does she have the kidnapping from the days in to the vehicle and then to the final destination, but now when the defendant in this case grabbed the victim's phone, you have the robbery by sudden snatching. So she's just multiplying the criminal charges based on her actions. And again, we don't know what was in the alleged victim's mind during this interaction. She has never been apprehended by ICE agents. She's complying, but she's complying based on the fact that she believes that this is a lawful authority. So at this time, she's complying to someone who she believes is a lawful authority.
Now, the deputy writes in this paperwork, I asked Merica if she believed Latrance was an ICE law enforcement agent, and she confirmed she did. Merica also told me Latrance had a handheld radio and was talking on it to who she assumed was other ICE agents. So it seems to be pretty elaborate. And this is where things take a really weird turn. Quote, I asked Merica if Latrance was making any threats or saying anything while they were driving to their destination, and she stated Latrance kept talking bad about Merica's husband and how Merica now has to suffer the consequences of her husband's actions. Now, Latrance's behavior reportedly got even more bizarre as they neared their destination, which it turns out wasn't the sheriff's office, but it was the apartment complex where Latrance lived. And the paperwork continues, as they were coming over the Hathaway Bridge, Latrance told Merica ICE would be waiting for them at these apartments. Latrance then backed in and parked in front of Building 3 of the Bridge Plaza apartments. Merica began to become even more frightened because she was unsure why she was taken back to an apartment. Latrance then got out of the vehicle and went to an unknown apartment. When she came back, she instructed Merica to get out of the car and go to room 108. When Merica got out, she noticed Latrance walk to her trunk and slightly open it. When Merica peeked in the trunk, she could see what appeared to be a clear tackle box and other stuff she could not make out. Latrance then closed the trunk and ran to the apartment. Merica stated she heard Latrance inside of the apartment making a lot of noise, like she was moving stuff around or talking to someone, so she used this opportunity to leave. Kaysia, your thoughts on that?
Thankfully, she did. You can just tell by the actions of the defendant that there's something going on mentally for her to go through this elaborate plan, but yet not execute it properly. You go through all of this to impersonate an ICE agent, and then you take her back to your location. And typically, as a defense attorney, when we see that the evidence is overwhelming, I'm just looking at the allegations in this case. The first thing I would do is order a competency evaluation, because clearly this is not what someone in the right state of mind would do. Whether or not this was a broken relationship, we know that it was severe enough that her ex-boyfriend had to take out a restraining order. The next thing I would do is to see if there's some mitigation factors, if there was some previous psychological issues, some mental issues. Perhaps we can mitigate this, because even with the kidnapping, that's a first-degree felony punishable by life. And then you're looking at the robbery by sudden snatching. She was previously a felon, so you're looking at a violation of probation. You're also looking at a violation of the previously entered injunction. So she has so many charges that maybe in this case, with the overwhelming evidence, it may be good for her to mitigate as opposed to take something like this to trial.
Now, Merica was able to make contact with a witness who we're not identifying, but this person was definitely able to help, and thank goodness. The affidavit says Merica knocked on his window, asked to use his phone because someone took hers. As Merica was on the phone contacting law enforcement, she heard Latrance leave. I asked Merica how she heard Latrance leave, and she described the car to be a loud, small, silver sedan. Merica then walked behind the witness's vehicle because she saw Latrance coming back around. I spoke with the witness, who confirmed Latrance got out of her vehicle and came up to him and asked if he had seen a female running. The witness then proceeded to ask Latrance why she took Merica's phone, and all she could advise was she knows what she did. Latrance then got back in her vehicle and parked in front of Building 3. The witness then told Merica she could come to his apartment until law enforcement arrived. So kudos to that witness for realizing something might be off, because Kaysia, another way, someone said, I don't want to get involved in this, or why should I believe the person that's coming to my door? But sometimes it takes that one person to really alter the course of these stories.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know how you will react in a certain situation. We always say if you see something, say something, but sometimes it does help if you get involved, but also considering your safety first, right? So in this case, it was really the efforts of the neighbor to step in, call authorities, and assist her in ultimately apprehending the defendant in this case.
And on the witness's phone, Merica ends up calling her husband Marlon. And this is where it gets interesting. Quote, as Merica was telling her husband what happened and described the female, Marlon advised it sounded like his ex-girlfriend, Tracy. And let me note something here. Latrance's Facebook page identifies her as Latrance Tracy Battle. Quote, once Marlon arrived on scene, he stated he had an injunction against his ex, Latrance Battle, for issues they've had in the past. The most current incident was about 2 years ago when Latrance showed up to his place of business and attacked him. Now, we're going to get into more detail about that in just a second, but first, I want to talk about what she's charged with. So we have robbery by sudden snatching, we talked about that, kidnapping with intent to facilitate a felony, falsely impersonating officer during commission of a felony. Kaysia, is she charged correctly here? And what is the potential punishment that she could be facing?
She's definitely charged correctly. So at the maximum, she's facing life for the first degree felony kidnapping.
Wow.
And oftentimes, when prosecutors charge a case, they can always amend the information based on their continuing investigation. Just because there's an arrest, the investigation continues. Officers are usually actively trying to find other witnesses. So if they amend the information after the initial charges are filed, she can be facing a lot of more serious charges. But the most serious one, obviously, is the kidnapping, which is punishable by life.
What are the defenses? Is it possibly we don't really know what her alleged plan was? We don't know what her mindset was. By that, I'm referring to Latrance. What could be a
Yeah.
defense to this? Because what do we have so far, right? We have at least 2 witnesses, including the alleged victim themselves. I don't know what the cell phone data, I don't know what the surveillance footage might show, but you tell me.
Let's start off with the initial one where it first started to snowball, which is the kidnapping. There's really no defense to that if you think about it. What is your defense that I took her because I was going to eventually take her to the right custom agent? Like, you're impersonating ICE, so you have no defense to your impersonation. You may say, she could have been under the substance of a prescribed medication, but being under the influence of drugs or alcohol is never a defense here in South Florida. So she can't say, well, I was under the influence of drugs or I was under the influence of alcohol and I wasn't in my right state of mind. That's good for mitigation. It's not good for defense. So she really, again, doesn't have a great defense, which is why when the evidence is overwhelming, it's better to mitigate or go into plea negotiations as opposed to fighting it and risking your entire life in prison.
Yeah, when the evidence seems to be quite substantial. And by the way, she would have qualified for bail, but here's the thing. When this alleged incident happened, Latrance was actually on probation. Yeah, it was
Yes.
swiftly revoked when these new charges were filed. She's locked up in the Bay County Jail with no bond because that probation was part of a guilty plea that she entered into in 2023 after, as I mentioned before, attacking her ex Marlon at his job with a hammer. So we got our hands on an arrest affidavit in that case as well. Something, to say the least. So it says on October 16, 2022, just before 7 a.m., Latrance showed up at Marlon's workplace and confronted him in the parking lot. And we checked, the sun didn't rise until after 7:30 that day. So keep in mind, it's dark when this is happening. The affidavit says the defendant then refused to leave the premises and proceeded to pull a hammer out of her backpack and charge towards the victim with the hammer. The defendant began swinging the hammer towards the victim's head and forcing him to hold her hand and dodge out of the way to avoid being struck. It should be noted that the victim and the defendant have been in a dating relationship over the course of approximately 10 years. And not only did Latrance attack Marlon, she also attacked his car. According to deputies, she did serious damage to the car's front windshield, the driver's side window, the hood. And how did she do it? The affidavit reads the defendant did so by producing a long metal rod approximately 3 feet long with a green plastic piece on the end. The defendant proceeded to strike the victim's vehicle multiple times. Kaysia, yikes, right? My gosh.
I told you, like this case, and now hearing what she did previously, which led her to probation, it screams competency. I'm curious as to when she was placed on probation, whether or not one of the terms and conditions of probation was either anger management, batterer's intervention courses, which is required for domestic violence cases, or even a mental health evaluation and a requirement to attend those classes because it doesn't appear that she received the proper help while on probation, which escalated into what she did now with the current kidnapping case. So she's in a lot of legal trouble. And in South Florida, in the state of Florida, rather, if you violate the terms and conditions of probation, you are held with no bond. So she is in there for a while.
Can that affect what evidence is presented at her current case? So can this episode be presented in her kidnapping case? And at the very least, if she's convicted, is it an aggravating factor that will affect the sentence?
Yes and yes. So if she decides to take this case to trial and testifies, then if she's a convicted felon, that's going to come out. Now, as far as the facts and circumstances of that case, I'm pretty sure pretrial motions will be filed and the judge will make the determination as to what comes in and what does not come in. But considering if she is convicted and or if the plea negotiations don't go well between the prosecutors and it's an open plea before the judge, this can be an aggravating factor. Her criminal history, her violence, safety for the community. These are some of the things the court considers when coming up with a sentence that will punish, because the criminal justice system for adults is meant to punish. Obviously, she's not a juvenile. That area of law is meant to rehabilitate. So in this case, clearly she has an issue with violence, and she's going to be punished accordingly.
And we talked about this, but we confirmed that after this attack and Latrance's arrest, Marlon got an injunction against her. She wasn't allowed to have any contact with him. In March of 2023, she entered a guilty plea to aggravated assault, criminal mischief. As part of that sentence, she was given 3 years of probation. She was banned from contacting the victim, had to do 100 hours of community service, was required to undergo a mental health evaluation, to attend counseling if necessary, complete a batterer's intervention program. And now her arrest a couple weeks ago means that she violated that probation. And her arraignment in violation of probation hearing, they're both scheduled for May 29th in Bay County Court, which makes me think about this, Kaysia. Was there any way to prevent this? Assuming all this happened with respect to America, is there any way to have prevented this? I mean, we talk about the conditions that she had to abide by with respect to her previous guilty plea, but it's not like police are monitoring her 24/7, right? It's a piece of paper, it's conditions, anyone can violate it. Isn't that a concern?
It is, but typically when people are placed on probation, there's various types of probation. Reported in probation, where you have to report into your probation officer maybe once a month, or there's random visits, there's random drug tests to ensure that that person is compliant with all the terms and conditions of probation. But as you stated, there's no way of making sure that this person doesn't become a repeat offender or habitual violent offender. So probation is meant to kind of give you a second chance with the hopes that you don't return back to the criminal justice system. But then if you violate probation, you are not entitled to a jury trial. It's a bench trial before the judge, and the standard is lower. We're not looking at beyond a reasonable doubt. And then the judge just has to make a determination. Is your violation willful and substantial? And clearly, looking at the probable cause affidavit, it lists out what she did. So the judge can take that into consideration. So she's looking at a sentence for her probation, violation of probation, but she's also looking at a sentence for these other new felony charges.
Kaysia Earley, quite the case. Thank you so much for coming on to break it down with me. It was great seeing you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.